Yeah.
Okay. Having a small issue, but we will get here yet. Exit full screen, minimize, can minimize, okay. What am I having a problem with? Okay, share screen.
Did they like his wig?
Share.
He hasn't seen it yet. He was in the middle of football.
Oh,
I didn't get his attention.
oh, okay. Okay, now go.
Okay, so we're going to start, and what this is going to be is a little bit of a description and some pictures when I was in Istanbul a few years ago, and we ended up going from Istanbul to Malta, and you'll see how we got there, which is a long, convoluted distance. So you can see Istanbul and the overall scheme of things is not the capital of Turkey. The capital of Turkey is Ankara, which you can see in the middle of Turkey there. But Istanbul is one of the probably the most famous city in Turkey, and it is the what would you call the throat between Russia and being able to get out, because you can see there the Black Sea, which is mostly Russian influenced, and for their navy or any of their vessels to leave, they have to go through Istanbul, which you'll see in a few minutes, to get into the Mediterranean and then to get out. So here is just a little bit of an overview of also why Turkey is so important in the world, because right now it is with Iraq and Syria and all of the refugees. It's the really only way to get out of that part of the world and try to get into Europe. And the current leader of Turkey is more or less holding most of the immigration back so they don't flood through Bulgaria or Yugoslavia, which is now Serbia and Slovenia, up into Europe, because they all want to go to Germany. They would like to get into where Sabina is and also enjoy good beer whenever they would like. But anyway, the throat of all this, what I'm saying, is right there in Istanbul. So in Istanbul, what you end up having is this little waterway that I just tried to describe, which is between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara. And this is called the Bosphorus Strait. And it's a relatively narrow waterway. And this is the waterway on one side. The right-hand side is Asia, and the left-hand side is Europe. So it's the only waterway that separates two continents. So it's a very, very important piece of real estate. So here we are now in Istanbul, and this is the Bosphorus. This is the waterway that connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean that all ships have to go through. And you can see why, over the thousands of years, why this has been so important. Whether you're trading hundreds of years ago or 1,000 years, you have to go down here, and it would be easy to control this. So Turkey is the place that controls Asia going into Europe. And in the background in this picture, you can see there are two large bridges where you have to cross. So if you don't go by boat across, you have to go by bridge. So when we arrived in Istanbul, it turns out that it was Ramadan, and Ramadan is a religious period, and it's usually about a month long, where the Muslims basically abstain from eating food, drinking, having sex, doing almost anything during the day other than family time, standing around. So for a whole month, people just kind of hang and wait for the evening, because even restaurants are basically closed during the day Nobody goes in, and because of Ramadan. And then the evening time, they're all queuing for waiting for the sun to go down so they can go into the restaurants, which as a visitor, which was me, was very advantageous. So at 5 o'clock, if you wanted to go in and sit down and have dinner, there was no problem, because I did not observe Ramadan, so that we arrived. But you can see the people. Is your typical very nice meal that you would pick from. It's eggplant and mostly vegetarian type food. So one of the very first places we went to in Istanbul was a place called the Dervish Lodge, which is it turns out that everybody's probably heard of the whirling dervish. Well, the whirling dervish is a type of dance that goes back way back in Islam, and I had no idea. But anyway, this was a very old lodge that was first built in 1509 in Istanbul. This is a picture of a picture in the lodge that showed some of the very early whirling dervish dancers. And like I said, it's a dance that's been going on in Turkey now for 750 years. So that evening we went out and we went to a cafe, and they have dancers. And so obviously I don't have a display, but it's a really interesting dance. So you see a lot of it in Turkey, in Istanbul. So as we go now to one of the more famous mosques, this is, you can see in the background is the Bosphorus, that waterway. And this is a mosque that was built in the year 537. And it was originally a Greek Orthodox church that was built. And not until the Ottomans, which took control, which is in about 1450, did it become a Muslim facility or a place for the Muslims. But it's one of the oldest mosques now in Istanbul. And you'll see the inside of it. It's a phenomenal place. Anyway, it's very, very old. Again, from the outside, you can see all the families and the fountains and just enjoying themselves. Inside of this is called the Hagia or Hagia Sophia. It's hard to display in pictures how large this thing is, and you can look down at the front how small the people are and the lights way down there. But to have built this in the 1500 or the year 500 was a feat that is hard to imagine. And like I said, it was Christian early on until the Ottoman Empire, which is in the 1450s. Then it turned in 1934, it turned secular, and it was open to all. And this last year, the current leader of Turkey turned it back into a Muslim-only facility, church. It was a museum, and now it's back into a mosque. So it keeps flipping it as the hundreds of years go on. What's interesting inside here is that there are still artifacts. So some of the walls that they found, you can still see the Christian influence. And you can even see as you walk around inside here, and I didn't get pictures of it, where they had crosses. Well, the Muslims came along in 1450 and they chiseled a lot of this stuff out because they wanted it to go away because they didn't want the Christians to be there. So anyway, they have found this stuff inside. Here's a couple of shots from down below where you can see the floors. Like I said, it's no longer a place of prayer, but it's just a place for, it's now going to be a place of prayer again because they turned it back into a mosque. But when I was there, it was more of a museum. This, you can see up towards the top. I mean, the Muslim influence you can definitely see, and like I said, many of the marble, you can still see the crosses that were chiseled out by people when they changed. I don't know what's going on right now, but my computer just froze. Oh, here we go. a typical, this is, the place is full of cats. So I just had to, my wife loves cats, so I had to take a picture. As we leave Hagia Sophia on the outside, there is also some obelisks. There's an ancient Greek obelisk that was originally built in the 4th century. You can see the minarets in the background, and those are minarets from the Blue Mosque, which you're going to see in a second, which is the 2nd largest mosque in Istanbul, because the Hagia Sophia is the first. But in between, they have this obelisk that comes from the 4th century. This picture I took off the internet because it gives you an overview of what is called the Blue Mosque. This was built by the Ottomans in the 1600s by Sultan Ahmed. And it's one of the few mosques that has 6 minarets, because like the Hagia Sophia and the other ones you'll see all have 4 minarets. But this one had a very large facility around it for schools and for the emperor to live in it. The emperor building it. Obviously, this is inside the courtyard looking at the Blue Mosque. And the Blue Mosque is still an official, was at that time an official mosque, was a place of prayer. Again, from the outside, it was Ramadan, so the people standing around looking at the Blue Mosque and just very respectful of the place. This is obviously why they call it the Blue Mosque. This is not my picture, but I took it off the internet because in the evening time, the lights are just, I mean, it's so dramatic in the evening, and my pictures couldn't come close to it, but it's just it's a phenomenal place. This is the inside of the Blue Mosque. I mean, the stained glass, and the picture is just it's second to none for a display of the stained glass. But you can still see the prayer rugs, and this is, like I said, an official one. The ceilings, I mean, it's dramatic what the Blue Mosque is on the inside. So leaving the Blue Mosque, because the 2 big mosques were the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. The other really major point that I loved in Istanbul was that they had a cistern, which is also a water supply. So in the year 500, they decided to store water underground to keep water coming up for people and for the emperor. So underneath Istanbul is a giant cistern that is 336 columns, and it was originally built by 7,000 slaves. And they they built it as if people were going to see this, because this was absolutely filled with water, and until they drained it, could you actually see the marble columns and all the intricate work that was done inside. So the columns that were holding the cistern up, you can see they took the time to make them beautiful, to chisel them out of marble, and it's just a very interesting place. So at the bottom of some of these columns, they would have marble heads sitting on their sides, sitting upside down, and this is Medusa, and she was supporting the column underwater. So for hundreds of years, she sat underwater. But obviously now it's not being used much anymore. This is, again, one of the larger palaces in Istanbul. This is called the Topkapi Palace, and it was built in about 1450. This is not my picture because I didn't have a drone to be able to get up, but it gives you a quick overview. I'll show you now what the insides look like. This is coming up to it, but it was the Sultan, I can't remember his name, that built it, and he built it obviously for himself. Women, nobody's going to want to hear this, but the women that the sultans had, he had 400 rooms in this place for his harem. And so there he would get his women, the girls were groomed. And so they brought them in from all over the empire and at different ages. And this was one of the rooms that was part of the, where the harem women would sit and would be, that is still inside this Topaki castle. Anyway, here is a quick description. They talks about the concubines, and the concubines were introduced into the harem at their tender age, were brought up, and that the sultan shared his bed, obviously, with and the person who groomed the different women were the queen mother. So it was a hierarchy. Everybody had to learn things as they went along, and then the sultan would make his choices. It was an interesting time period. Anyway, inside of this castle. There was also a weird thing called a circumcision room. Yossi explained to me that Muslims have been circumcising for a long time, but there was another room that was called the circumcision room, and the walls are, you can see here, very ornately shown, but this was a normal thing inside of this, inside of Topaki castle. So when you're walking around the castle or the palace, the guy's trying to sell you some coffee, not a Starbucks coffee, obviously, but it's a guy selling you coffee. But this is your Turkish coffee, very strong. So we leave the palace now, and so one of the things I wanted to do was to go into an old Turkish bath. So this was the original Turkish bath from 1500s that is still being used. They wouldn't allow pictures inside, but right now the entrance is not impressive, but when you get inside, it's just, it's an amazing place. But for the last 500-600 years, it's been a Turkish bath. So I want to see what are the Turkish baths like. So the next place we went to was the Grand Bazaar. Again, one of the oldest bazaars or markets in all of Europe. And all, Sabina could tell me differently, but in the 1400s, this was originally built by Sultan Mehmet, and who originally conquered Constantinople, which became Istanbul. And this is one of the entrances to that. Very interesting place. Here's a few pictures on the inside. It's just rows and rows and rows of shopping, and this was originally where all the merchants would bring their wares from whether it's from Asia or Europe or whatever to sell. So you can see all the cloth and things, but it's now very touristy. So this is the kind of the end of Istanbul for me. So we left Istanbul and I flew down to Bodrum. You can see this map. And right next to Bodrum, where the star is a town called Marmaris. And Marmaris is where we ended up meeting a friend who you're going to meet in a second. And his name is Rodney Pimentel, and he had taken he bought a boat, a catamaran, which you'll see in a second. And he bought this boat in the BVI's and sailed it to the Mediterranean. And he took his two boys out of school for a couple of months, and he flew them over and onto the boat. And so his family spent 2 long summers sailing around the Mediterranean. And at the end of that time period, that 2-year period, the boys had to go back to school. He couldn't take time off anymore. He called me up and asked me, would I help him bring the boat back? And so I said, I'll take part of the section. So I took the section from Marmaris to Malta. So this is where we're going to now go from Marmaris. Marmaris, we flew down, and in the background here, you can kind of see there is the town, very protected from the ocean. The marina where we're coming into to come into the boat, it's a very large marina, and it's a very metropolitan marina because it's so protected. You can see all the islands around it. So even in the winter time when the winds blow or the summer, it's a very protected marina. So we are now down in the marina. The boats, I don't know, it doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but to any boater understands, this is called a Ned tie. What that means is that in the Mediterranean, because there's such a limited amount of space, the boats go in stern in. So there's not enough room. So everybody is stacked side by side, stern in, and it's a difficult way to get off the boat, but because they don't have a lot of room and they have so many boats, that this is the way to get to it. There is the beginning of seeing Rodney. This is my friend who's climbing aboard a boat to climb onto his boat on the far outside, which is the catamaran I'm getting aboard also. So we ended up getting aboard, and so Rodney had to check out of Turkey, because when you leave a country with a boat, you have to go down to the customs office, get your paperwork, and leave. So we get the correct paperwork, we're leaving, and as we do, we see this, typical European-styled crazy architecture boat, but it was just interesting. But no matter how interesting it is, if you notice what's holding it up is a couple of sticks. So it's just really interesting how they keep this boat upright, and it's just it's not the normal way we do it in the States. How do they get these boats out of the water there? I wanted to see that. And so you could see the size of this hoist. There's my friend Jamie, who's standing in front of it, this tire. I mean, Jamie's about 6 feet, so this thing, the tire's got to be 10 feet in diameter. I mean, it's just huge. So as we leave Marmaris, the first thing we see is the Coast Guard checking things out. In Marmaris there, you can see in this map, there's a little bit of a bay, and this is what I was trying to show you before of why it's so protected, because as a boat that comes in off the water, you weave your way back into that section back there, and it's a very protected area. So as you see on the map, there is a little island called Simi, and this is where we're heading to first. So as we do, we pass the first of hundreds of these type of ships in Turkey and the Croatian coast. This boat is called a gullet. And so when people who don't know how to sail want to sail this, they get 10 people aboard this, or 15 people, and you can cruise or spend a week or 5 days aboard this boat, and they cruise along the coast. They never put up sails. All of these boats, you'll see a few as we picture through this, they're always under motor, and it's just some tourists that want to cruise along the Croatian coast or the Greek coast. Here's our first entrance into Simi Island, typical Greek island, built right down to the seashore, and it's relatively dry, as obviously you can see. So as we come in, we're looking for a quiet anchorage place, and you can see how nice it is. It's just extremely quiet. Is your typical Greek community as you come into these islands that the tourists never see, because this is just normal. They build these beautiful little places right up to the seashore. They have their boats there. Somebody's got to mute somebody, whoever it is. I appreciate it. So there's Rodney. Our way of getting in, you can see the boat in the background, the catamaran. Our way to get into shore, that was what's called a dinghy, but this is our little transportation vehicle. Again, your normal little vessel in Greece, very typical Greek island. You can see how bare it is, no trees or anything around, everybody huddled right down to the seashore. So we walk into town. That's Rodney, the gentleman who owns the boat, and first thing we see is the guy clipping sponges, because one of the things how they make money there is that the tourists aren't there, is to get sponges for the tourists to buy. But sponges have obviously been collected by the Greeks for many years. we're now leaving Simi, and this is just a beautiful view of the island looking back. One of the first things we have to do before we leave is make sure we get some fuel. And it turned out that the fuel was a little bit cheaper in Greece than it was in Turkey. So you judge your fuel purchases by what the price is. So we're fueling up right here. This is inside the cockpit. This is Rodney and a good friend of mine, Elaine and Jamie, who you'll both meet. They're part of this trip also, because Rodney asked me first, and then he said, well, do you know anybody else? And so I said, Jamie and Elaine. And so the four of us were the crew on this trip. So as we left Simi, we head to the next island called Astapalaya, which is another really cute little place that hardly anybody ever goes to. So as we come in, you can see it's pretty rough out there, but the Greeks have built these beautiful little communities. So we come into the inner harbor. We think this is a great place, and it is. So we drop anchor, and I dive down and move the anchor, because 25 feet you can still see the anchor, and you move it around to make sure it's situated right. And we barely get making lunch, and all of a sudden the police is at the dock out there yelling at us to get out of the marina because no, you can't anchor here. But it took us a while to figure out what he's trying to tell us, because he's yelling at us in Greek, and none of us speak Greek. So it took a while. So after we were kind of situated, and you'll see where the boat got situated in a little bit, we ended up going into shore and hiking up to the castle on top of the hill. And this was a castle that was built about the year 1200, and it was called the Querini Castle. And it was originally built by a Venetian family, which is so interesting, because so much of that southern part of Greece originally belonged to the Venetians, which is now Italy. And it wasn't until later that they actually became Greek. But this was built by the Venetians, and it was conquered actually by the Ottomans, because the Ottomans were the force in the 1500s, and they took it away from the Venetians, which made it back into a Muslim area. And not until 1947, it became part of Greece. So this little place here, Astapalaya, has been, conquered and pushed around by a lot of different people over the years, but not till 1947 did it become part of Greece. So as we're climbing up here to look at this place, it's just, it's your beautiful Greek architecture. Everything is white and really spotless and clean. So the gentleman you're going to continue to meet is on your left is Jamie, a friend, Rodney, myself, and his wife, Elaine. There's our boat on Astapalaya. When they kicked us out of the inner harbor, they said, okay, you guys gotta go park somewhere else. And so we ended up, found a nice little anchor spot on the outskirts. But this is Astapalaya. It's just a spectacular place. Obviously here we are at the top. You can look out and you can see the smaller islands around, and non-touristy. When you get away from these the big tourist spots, it's actually authentic Greece, authentic everything. But again, one of these vessels that went by, these gullets, again, full of tourists, and it's a 2 or 3 day run. And this one looked like a 1 day run, but they pile them aboard. They make them look like pirate ships, but they just push them around the water. But they're fun. I took this picture to add it in here just to show you that boat that you saw on shore, that kind of an ugly, it depends on perspective, but that design, he anchored near us. So our boat is a little to the left there that we anchored, and that gray thing came in there. They had obviously dropped him back in the water, but anyway, it was somebody with their own wants on a boat. So after we left Astapalaya, we went over to an island called Ios. And Ios is right next to another island that everybody knows called Santorini. And I put the arrow there to show you Santorini, which you're going to start to see, but in relationship to also where we started, flew into Bodrum, went to Marmaris, Kos, and all the little islands across. So we're now going to go to Santorini. Santorini, interestingly enough, is we wanted to anchor there, but the problem is it is an old volcano. And so the water on the inside of Santorini Island is so deep that you literally, there are only a few spots that you can anchor, and they really don't want pleasure craft anchoring there. So we anchored nearby at another island called Ios, and we took a ferry across to Santorini. So Santorini, because it is volcanic, nobody lives low, everybody lives high. So you're going to see all of the houses in a few minutes are high up there on the cliffs. But then the question is, how do you get up there? Well, most tourists, when they bring cruise ships in, they put them into these buses and they drive them up this switchback hill to get up. Or you can also take a gondola up. So this is, I think it's about 20 years old, this gondola, because the original way to come up this hill was by mule. And so they used to bring the tourists up on muleback, and they still have mules that go up and down. So if you're coming off the cruise ship and you want to come up the old way, you can still ride the mule to the top of the hill, but it's not a lot of fun. So there it is. We are now in Santorini at the top, looking down, and you can see obviously a couple of cruise ships. And the interesting thing is you can't anchor because it's way too deep, but you can see the outskirts there. That is part of the volcano. Santorini is one of the more picturesque places. It's built on top of the outcropping, and everybody's seen these type of pictures of Santorini. But it's a fun place to be. So we stopped. We had walked around, had a good time. But if you look beyond Rodney's hat there, you can see the tourists, because it's just wall-to-wall tourists. People coming in off those cruise ships, 4,000 and 5,000 at a crack, and so anyway, the streets are packed. So after we left Santorini, we went to another, to me, an amazing little island, and this is called Foligandros Island. It's a relatively small island, but very, very interesting. So you can see the boat in the background there. We pulled in the harbor, we anchored, nobody chased us out, so we felt good. We took the dinghy, went to shore, and then we went to the other side of the island, which is what we wanted to see. And so this, again, was a community that was built by the Venetians. It was built in the year around 1200, they said, to about 1566. And it was built high on the cliff. And if you look off a little bit to the right, you'll see that everything is terraced, because they had to grow things on this island. It's basically a stone island. So all the agriculture came there. This picture I took because it's unbelievable that somebody would build something so close to a sheer cliff, but obviously nobody cared. Maybe they lost a few workers, but it wasn't a big deal. But they built it right up to the edge, and these are about 600-foot cliffs. These terracings are all stone terrace, because that's obviously what they had in materials. But they don't grow much food there anymore, but this is going back to the days of the Ottomans and past. This was all for food growth. So in the little town, we walk around. It's a real cute little town. This was I love this picture. The lady's probably lived here all of her life with her cat, and she's tending her little plants on this beautiful little place. I mean, you can't get any nicer than this. So as we're walking through town, I have no idea how old this little archway was, but you can see the wooden supports. It's a very small community, but very, very well maintained, and just a fun place to be. So as we left Santorini, we ended up sailing from Santorini to where the Arrow is, and that's around the Peloponnese Peninsula. And the Peloponnese Peninsula is a major piece of real estate to get around, but it was not a problem. So anyway, we sailed around. We arrived on the other side. We're now getting fuel and water, because it's obviously the first thing when you arrive after 2 days being underway, is you need to fill everything back up again. I'll point this out later again, but if you look at the front of the boat, there's going to be an incident you'll see in a little while, but it requires that beam going across to be straight. You'll see a little later on what happened. So here we are as we're coming into the Peloponnese Peninsula. This is a town called Methonia. Again, a great little town. It's right on the southern coast of the Peloponnese Peninsula. And it's a walled city because, again, going back 1400s, 1500s, everybody had to protect from being attacked from the sea. So these are the walls of what's called the Methonia Castle. And this, you'll see more of that. So after we arrived, one of the things we wanted to go see was the Olympic Games started in a town called Olympia. Well, Olympia is just north of Methonia. So we took the time to go up to Olympia because we wanted to see where did the Olympic Games start. And so we'll see some pictures. These are some artifacts from the original Olympic Games, which go back to the 4th century. Obviously some ruins, some original helmets, statues, from that time period. You can imagine, again, this is now Greece, but you look at what people were wearing. These are all Roman outfits. And so the Romans had total control of this area because this was part of the Roman Empire. Here we are in the actual place where the Olympic Games started. And these are some of the original grounds of where they had little houses and they had viewing, and that doesn't mean a lot. This was the field because the stands were on either side, right side, left side of this open area. This was the original Olympic Games. Going back now, after leaving Olympia, we went back to Methonia because I wanted to see that castle in more detail. Like I said, it goes back to the 13th century. Again, beautiful stonework, phenomenal protection, because if you were trying to, as a marauder wanting to attack this place, it would have been hard to get your people up these walls without being killed along the way. Inside of Methonia Castle, it's a huge place, and it's hard to imagine that they built these roads and these aqueducts all inside, all built out of stone. None of it is really well preserved. The Greeks they've left it basically in their original form, but you can see what it would have been like on the inside because everybody lived inside the castle. Some of the walls on the inside that are still there. So a quick thing here is we left Methonia and our next port was going to be Malta. So we left at about 8 o'clock at night and the sun's just going down. And as we leave, we're sailing out and it's getting dark, I don't know, 9:30, 10 o'clock. And all of a sudden we hit something. And so you can imagine you're, I don't know, 150 miles offshore and you hit something and what's happened? Our first reaction is check the boat, is it sinking or are we sinking? Well, we figured out that wasn't the problem. So we get up on deck and it turned out that we never saw what we hit, but we assumed because a lot of the Greek fishermen will go out in their wooden boats and they will drink and they will not put lights out because we didn't see anything. It didn't show up on radar because it was wood. It was probably an old fishing boat, a guy out there who had been drinking or fishing all day and just wanted to rest. And we hit him because when we hit him, out of the corner of my eye, I see this green thing go down the side of the boat. But later on, what it turned out to be was the boat got pretty badly damaged on the front. And what that meant was that we were not able to continue sailing on to Malta. So we ended up having to motor all the way. But here's the next question. And this was, we had 4 people aboard, 2 pretty liberal and 2 pretty conservative. And so the question was, do we go back to Greece and tell them we hit something? We don't know what. You can see the paint on there, did damage, and tell the police we don't, we tried to, we raced around for quite a while looking for somebody, couldn't find anybody. But so the question was, do we go back and report this or do we continue on? Well, the end result was the 2 conservatives said, we go on. If we go back, we're going to get into litigation. Now we are the rich Americans who have been damaged, but now the poor Greek fishermen who happen to be drunk out there in the middle of the ocean with no lights on, but you hit him, right? And so we ended up going on to Malta. But this is just part of the damage that was done to the boat, but it just meant we couldn't sail anymore. So you can see the arrow on the right-hand side. That was an arrow, obviously we're from Methonia on the Peloponnese Peninsula where we left, and you can see Malta there. That's where we were heading towards. So as we're underway, the Mediterranean is not the open ocean. If the seas are down, it's pretty benign. So it took us 2 days to motor in that direction. So this was an evening meal on the boat. The steering station, just to give you an idea of what the boat looks like, it's very comfortable. So you have a steering station, autopilot, and motor controls. Inside, there's a little living room area, a very nice place to sit. Anyway, it's very comfortable as you're going. So this is our first view as we're coming into Malta from the ocean. And Malta is one of these unbelievably beautiful places. Again, it was built a long time ago in the 14th century, and it was built by the Order of St. John. And it was meant to be a refuge and also a place to do a lot of trading between the Asian countries and that. Anyway, Malta became a French protectorate for a while, and it eventually turned into its own country. But it was actually never conquered. The Germans tried it during World War II. A lot of people, the Ottomans, they did take it over, but nobody really destroyed it or did very much to it. So coming into Malta, it's just the scenery is just second to none. A walled city, as you can see all the way around. The architecture is just fabulous. So again, when you come into a port, first thing you have to do is get some fuel. So we ended up fueling up, watering up. So as we're heading over to find a place to park, we obviously are not the only pleasure boats in Malta, because Malta has its own tax haven status. So a lot of people keep their yachts in Malta. Here is what's called Embassy Row. These are all embassy buildings from the different countries. It's hard to see from a distance, but each one is a different embassy. Malta has all these little inlets for all the different boats to stop. But you can see this is an area in the far side, all walled, spectacularly beautiful, but all full of high-end yachts. We ended up parking next to what's called the Malta Yacht Club, and they gave us a little place on the outside. This is Rodney, obviously just on the back, just a picture of the boat. So Rodney and I jump in the boat, and we want to see it from the water again. And you can see Malta very well protected, so challenging it from the sea would have been very hard. We anticipate or thought that this is the kind of a boat that we hit. You can see an old wooden Greek boat or the style of boat with a very very stout. We obviously did no damage to it, but our aluminum boat did and fiberglass boat did. This is downtown Malta in a town called, their capital is called Valletta. It's a very old town, a great place to walk around. They had a little celebration. Typical celebration has to be religious. The religious pieces being dragged around town. I took this picture off the internet because this is one of the few places in Valletta that was actually bombed during World War II, because the Germans tried to conquer it and were not able to. But this was the original opera house in Malta, and this was the only building that was absolutely just taken to the ground, which is unfortunate because you can see it's a beautiful building. So around Valletta, the town, it's hard to get this perspective, but there is a deep moat, and to have entered it, you had to go across a bridge. And there is the bridge that no longer stands, but this gives a little bit of an idea of what it would have taken to get into the town, because you couldn't conquer it from the sea. So if you came by land, there was this huge moat that you had to cross, and then there was a bridge. And so the Maltese, I mean, they were very smart. This is why it was so hard to conquer. Impossible almost from land, and then almost impossible from the ocean because of the walls. There you can see it's more walls around Valletta. Interesting, out of all the churches I've been to in the world, the one in Valletta is probably the gaudiest. It doesn't look like it from the outside. This is called St. John's Cathedral. Here is a little bit of the inside. I mean, it's hard to put words to the gaudiness of it. I mean, every floor piece is marble, and every piece has a design. Every piece of the wall is either gold or it's just hard to put words on. Here's one of the tiles, marble tiles, and I don't know what they're depicting, but they said that most of these large tiles were actually tombs for one of the priests, because they would put them underneath. It's just the pictures don't do it justice. It's just so off the top of the Richter scale gaudy, because the floors are decorated, the walls are decorated, the ceilings are decorated. So after going through that, we decided, okay, we want to see it a little bit more. So typical, not a taxi, but we jumped into this little cart, and he took us to the outskirts of Valletta. Valletta's in the background, you can see, and now we're to the next little town as you leave Valletta on Malta, and this is called Mdina, and this was the original central where the government was in Malta. So it's a beautiful, small little walled city. Not a lot of people go there because they all go to Valletta. They don't go to Mdina, but Mdina is just a spectacularly beautiful place. It reminded me of one of the Greek Isles because everything's so clean, so quiet, so smooth, so nice, and almost no cars, because this goes back to the days of just carts. So you walk around. So we left Mdina and we went to the northern part of Malta, and I took this. This is a picture I took off the internet because I didn't take a picture of this, but you'll see it in a second. This is one of the older solar temples that were built on Malta, and a solar temple, meaning that to be able to see when the summer equinox solstice, the winter solstice was, on the angles when the sun would shine into these temples, depending on what time of the year it was. It was just a beautiful old religious temple. This one they estimate to be built in the year 2500 BC. So it's 5,000 years old. Anyway, just an amazing structure. So we continued past this place to the next old temple, and this is called Hagar Kim, and this is the oldest temple that was built on Malta, and this goes back to 3700 BC. This one, UNESCO, about 10 years ago, put a tent over because they think that time is eroding, obviously, all the stones, which it is, but I don't know how a little bit of canvas is going to make a difference in 5,000 years. But anyway, here we have the Hagar Kim facility, and it's just a 5,000-year-old place where people lived, and you can see why Malta was so important, because all the trading routes, if you're going to sail through the Mediterranean, would always end up in Malta one way or another, and so this would have been one of the early birthplaces. These are some of the original structures, the obviously doors and things that they put in, the designs that they put into the stones to give it, they don't really know why, but it's just decoration. But this stuff is, 3,700 years before Christ, very old stuff, and it was mostly done on limestone. This is the edge of Hagar Kim, and just as a side piece, there's an island there in the background. And so during World War II, the British were pretty important at the time. They used that island back there as target practice. So that island has been almost flattened, but it's one of the more disgraceful things that comes out of a war. But that island, the British thought, okay, nobody needs that island, let's just use it for target practice. And they just almost blew it out of the Mediterranean. That's again, we're now leaving Hagar Kim. There's the two sites, the one that is 3,700 BC and the next one. As I walk over to the edge here, this is what the Mediterranean looks like looking down. So it's you can see the Mediterranean is crystal clear, and why they would have built something so high up when they would have had to go down to go fishing was, it obviously has some religious significance, but don't know what it was. And that's basically the end of the trip. I will click off, and if somebody has any questions or comments, you're welcome to ask. Let me stop sharing. Did I stop sharing? Yeah, I did. Stop video recording.